are new to dirt track racing and they see high limit socials and see all these posts, they're gonna be like, oh, we hate the Outlaws, you know what I mean? Like, they're gonna jump on board of the narrative that's being created by High Limit, pretty much, of like, yeah, we support High Limit, we don't support the Outlaws, when realistically, like Misha is saying, all the teams get along. They're not like us versus you. Like, I feel like they're talking about like more like new fans, not necessarily people who have like been around forever.
Yeah, well, that too. I just think overall, everyone's just trying to support sprint car racing, so the more competition, the merrier.
Yeah.
I think it's getting way too exaggerated.
I mean, like we were saying at lunch, like dirt late models, they've had 2 different series, Lucas Oil late models, World of Outlaws late models, and there's not really much us versus them mentality that like happens in dirt late models. Maybe there is. I'm not as deeply embedded in that, you know, community as sprint car racing, I feel, but it's interesting that I guess just since it's new, you know, like you were saying, in the sprint car scene, to have 2 competing, you know, national tours, it feels like more of a us versus them, who's going to succeed, you know, who's gonna fail, like, are the Outlaws gonna fold, like, I don't know, there's just there's a lot of speculation.
Well, I don't think that they'll fold, but I think the big thing is it's like whenever there's like new or change or something, or somebody's trying to challenge like the leader per se, there's like pushback on it, and especially and it's not even that High Limit took a lot of the Outlaw drivers, because I really don't think in theory they did, because there's still people who are running full-time with the All-Stars that may have looked to otherwise gone full-time Outlaw racing this year if it wasn't for All-Stars turning into High Limit. Like, they're just staying.
No, that's true.
But also some people are switching over. But I think in that regard, like, the more competition, the merrier within a certain extent. Like, you don't want to have too much competition, and then everybody's kind of like, if they're all running on the same night, like, instead of having like 20 cars, you get like 4 here, 4 here, 4 here, you know what I'm saying? Like, in that instance. But I think in the same token, like, High Limit, air quotes, All-Stars are like really the first time that there's been like a national touring, a second sprint car national touring.
Well, here's the thing,
series.
It has happened a couple times in sprint car history. I've been learning about this lately. I think it's happened twice, but basically what's happened is whoever was that competitor to the Outlaws, after like the first year, they went away. Like,
because they probably just ran out of money.
Yeah, like basically they've never been able to like really compete with the Outlaws. But now that you have Brad Sweet, Kyle Larson, I don't know who ran with the, you know, older competitor tours to the Outlaw to know like what, you know, I guess caliber of drivers were on those competing tours, but High Limit does have a lot going for them in like regard to star power, who's, you know, in charge of it. Like Brad Sweet, I mean, he's a pretty respectable guy, you know, in the sprint car world. So,
and they're paying. So like that's they're
high
putting
versus
they're like really forcing a lot of people's hands, and it's like, you know, as far as like paying goes, like why wouldn't you go wing sprint car racing at this rate? And it's not even just because of like the winning like earnings, it's like all across the board.
Well, here's a question: do you feel like that's sustainable? Like, do you feel like the purses that are on the line in High Limit this season, do you feel like that's sustainable for the next 40 years?
Well, you got to look at it this way. The purses, like, let's just say a USAC perspective, or like even just winning your local race at Attica or Fremont or whatever. From what I know, they've been the same for years and years and years and years. So you have to take into the account of inflation. So with inflation, your dollar isn't as valuable as maybe it was 2-3 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Well, the purses haven't kept up with inflation. So okay, so I get the perspective of like being a promoter, the series direct, like running a series, whatever. But at the same point in time, they want to start maybe like charging more for food and concessions and for your pit pass or for your and like grandstand ticket or whatever, but the purses really I feel like have always stayed the same.
Yeah.
So like they're not keeping up with inflation, you know?
For like the sprint car teams who are paying more, you know, for
and like everything else is costing more, so then you're really as a team owner, you're not making money to begin with, unless you got like a heavy hitter sponsor and you're pocketing some off of that. But
yeah,
I really think at the end of the day, like I'm looking at it from like an economic standpoint. Like if you're a hired driver, okay, that makes sense. Like you're walking away with something in your pocket.
Yeah.
When you leave the track, and maybe a little, maybe a lot, depending on where you finish or whatever. But like from a team owner standpoint, at the same point in time, like you know you're gonna lose money. It's just a matter of like how much and trying to minimize that. And so they're cutting more and more into the owner's pockets.
Yeah.
By like not keeping up, like economics, you got to keep up with inflation. Otherwise, I mean, it's really no different than the wage gaps and stuff. Like
we're getting into some real political issues right now.
No, like I could be honest with like wages aren't keeping up with inflation either.
Tone back the lawyer talk, you know. So overall, you feel like it is sustainable. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think, assuming that they can get the sponsors, and I feel like the marketing is there, because I feel like the consumer is more so turning, and based on statistics I've seen, the addition of live streaming, so on and so forth, like consumers are kind of turning more towards grassroots racing because they have more access to it now to them before.
Yeah.
And so I think the sponsorship money like will be there. I don't know their investors. I don't know where they're getting their sponsorship dollars from. I don't know what their spreads look like, but
yeah,
I would say, I mean, this is like their second year now running this money. I mean, we'll see. One can only hope.
Yeah. Well, I think with all the conversation that's going on with the Outlaws and High Limit right now, like obviously we're in like week 1 of the sprint car season. Like Outlaws have just started. I would rather talk about all this stuff like 2-3 months in, or like at the end of the season, and be like, okay, let's compare the two. Like, how did they do? Versus everything right now is basically pure speculation. Other than the drivers on the roster, and knowing that, you know, High Limit got 17 guys to, you know, commit full time versus the Outlaws have 12. So I mean, yeah. I think it's only like 5 different, but
well, I just think overall, like, if you want to compare rosters, whatever, it's really not. If somebody wanted to go outlaw racing, like, I get it. When I was growing up and doing the wing sprint car stuff, I always was like the mantra, like, I want to be an outlaw. I want to be an outlaw. Even if you're not racing with the Outlaws, doesn't mean you can't be an outlaw. Like, I think Rico brought up, like, being a true outlaw, running a true outlaw. Running a true outlaw schedule.
Take the exit, then turn left onto West Granada.
But on the other side of that, it's like, I think the other purpose of High Limit was like to pay drivers and teams more what they deserve.
Yeah.
But I also think to just improve racing overall, because like series, like I said before, like aren't keeping up with those payouts, but also to give the drivers and teams more freedom. I think the big thing really, and maybe they kind of started this by doing the midweek or the money series. I don't know what they call it.
Yeah,
but
midweek money series.
Yeah.
You had it.
But it's like brought up in the past about how the drivers, the World of Outlaws drivers, are basically like super committed and like almost married to the series, to where they only have so many limitations on where else they could go and have the opportunity to make more money. It's like not even saying the Outlaws need to pay more, but give us the freedom to, if we're off, we can go and make money here or there. And so I think that's also like an indirect or direct point of it. And so I think it's just trying to like push change just for the betterment of sprint car racing. Like,
well, I feel like in general the tone and like response of drivers that I've talked to in general for the High Limit and Outlaw thing is most drivers seem to be just happy that, you know, sprint car racing is growing, and, you know, whether it's through this controversy or not, people are paying attention to sprint car racing. You know, like, there's a lot to pay attention to. And so I feel like overall, kind of like you're saying, drivers are looking at it as more of, this is an opportunity, not only for us, but for the sport as a whole, to try to grow it and just do something different, you know, and bring new eyes. Maybe Kyle Larson will bring new eyes from, like, the NASCAR side or whatever it is, wherever the eyes come from. You know, I think they're just interested and excited to see what this could potentially do for the sport.
Yeah, it's like more opportunity, more money, and also ways more freedom too, because the guys that don't want to run 80 races a year, if they just want to do the 60, okay, cool. You have more time to spend with your family or whatever, because it is hard to find help these days, so it's also hard to find people to commit to that rigorous of a schedule. So more flexibility in the same token, but I don't like how it's kind of like Outlaws versus High Limit and like comparing the rosters, because it's like at the same point in time, a lot of those High Limit guys are racing the Outlaw race at Volusia. Like, it's not to say that they're not going to go and race with the Outlaws too.
Yeah.
They can really, I mean, even if they're not a fully committed Outlaw driver, they can still be Outlaws, you know?
For sure.
So
do you feel like the World of Outlaws should maybe eliminate that restriction of only having, I think it's 4 races? Is it 4 races they get to do?
Yeah. Well, I understand their perspective. It's from the business perspective, like the competition clause, if you will. That's kind of like what they have.
Well, with like the t-shirt trailer stuff and, you know, only full-time Outlaws can have a t-shirt trailer.
I mean, I really think if you talk to the drivers or the team owners, I mean, they may not come out and say this directly, but I'm sure there's a lot of contributing factors. It's never just one thing.
Right.
But there's probably a lot of factors that went into people's decision making, but I feel like from like the World of Outlaws perspective, from the business standpoint, like, yeah, if they're going to sell X amount of drivers and these certain drivers to, like, sponsors and say, look, we have all these people, like, they need to know that they have people committed to that. So with that comes certain restrictions and more red tape.
But, I mean, if you're committed to it and you're saying you're going to go run the full tour, why couldn't you go show up at a different race? Like, I don't know that I understand the, like, wanting to make it an exclusive thing of, like, you can only see these drivers, you know, basically at Outlaw races, and that's probably a way they sell tickets, is like, you know, you can't see them really anywhere else. But at the same time, I'll be interested to see if the whole High Limit situation maybe makes them change their minds or, like, reevaluate that policy.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, like, seeing it from all angles, there's more like downsides to having more of those restrictions and constraints with the drivers. Also, it can come back to like a name, image, likeness thing. I mean, you could make so many different arguments for this, but
and lawyer talk.
I don't know. We'll see.
We'll see. I think that's the general consensus.
I think people are taking it way too personal.
Yeah.
Like, this is racing. Let people do. Because at the end of the day, teams, fans, everybody's putting a lot of money into doing this. So, the fact that people are trying to control, like, where you essentially can use your resources at, I think is also ridiculous.
Yeah. I think fans need to be, like, all of us need to be open-minded as we go into this year, and not as protective of, like, oh, I'm an Outlaw person, like, they've been around forever, like, it's ridiculous, High Limit's trying to, like, take over, you know, or like, oh, I'm a High Limit person, like, the Outlaws have been doing it wrong, running it wrong, like, I'm gonna, like, only support High Limit, like.
But what are you? I'm kidding. I think everybody can coexist. I don't want people trying to create. Who knows? The rhetoric. Social media also doesn't help.
Yeah. No, I definitely think there is a social media rhetoric being created that isn't necessarily helping the ecosystem coexist. maybe it's happening for publicity, things like that. Like, and I get it, trying to get people to pay attention, but it's provided an interesting, like, dynamic and vibe right now. I feel like, at least at Volusia, the whole